everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll be doing a methodology breakdown of CDM's methodology AMS-I.D, which focuses on grid-connected renewable electricity generation. Keeping in mind that the DLT Climate Hackathon is wrapping up, I thought it'd be a great time to explain in more detail how we create policies, so stay tuned for that. For those who may not be familiar with the DLT Climate Hackathon, it's an initiative where we've partnered with HBAR Foundation, DLT Science Foundation, and Alcott as sponsors. The primary focus of this event is to encourage the development of digital solutions for the environmental market, including the digitization of methodology. There's an exciting total prize pot of $100,000 up for grabs. If you haven't signed up for the DLT Climate Hackathon yet, don't worry, there's still time. The deadline for submissions is April 8th, and everyone is welcome to enter until then. So before we begin going into methodology specifics, let's do a quick overview of who we are. Envision blockchain solution builds applications for the Web3 space, and we focus on guiding organizations through 3 major milestones on their Web3 journey: use case analysis, proof of concept development, scaled deployments, and we're also the builders and maintainers of the Guardian. As you may be aware, the process of creating and gathering data to support carbon claims is often manual and susceptible to errors. This can result from various factors such as poor data quality, a lack of assurance, potential double counting, greenwashing, and just an overall lack of trust. To tackle these challenges, the Guardian employs an advanced policy workflow engine. By doing so, it can replicate the standards and business requirements set by regulatory bodies, creating highly adaptable digital methodologies known as. This innovative approach not only helps organizations meet regulatory compliance, but it also allows them to streamline their carbon accounting processes, enhance data quality, and minimize the risk of errors and inaccuracies. So you could think of a policy within the Guardian as a digital version of a methodology. And using the workflow blocks like building blocks or Legos, you can construct your desired workflow with ease. I'll also explain this a little bit more when we start talking about policy creation. In the center of the system are 4 main technologies that help us provide trustworthy and clear solutions for the carbon market. Firstly, we use decentralized identifiers, also known as DIDs. These are unique identifiers that let individuals and groups create their own IDs using systems that they trust. DIDs ensure that carbon credits go to the right parties and can't be duplicated or tampered with. Secondly, we have verifiable credentials. VCs come into play when digital documents have information about the subject, who issued it, the type of credential, specific details about the subject, and proof of how the credential was obtained. VCs make sure that carbon credits are given only to those who meet the necessary requirements and that the credits are valid and trustworthy. And lastly, we use verifiable presentations, VPs, which are a group of 1 or more VCs. So now we'll move into a recap of our past webinar. Each webinar focuses on a specific methodology from our open source library, and it's aimed at helping our users and anyone interested in the Guardian to understand how these methodologies can be streamlined for efficient implementation. We've covered methodologies from Vera, Gold Standard, and CDM. And you can find videos for each one of these at the Envision blockchain YouTube channel. Now I'll go over our policy development checklist. In this slide, we'll discuss the essential steps you can take to create a policy for the Guardian. We'll go through these quickly, and in a few minutes, we can go into more detail. So when we create a policy, we want to identify the standard and an appropriate methodology, review the standard and methodology documents, identify any roles, processes, and requirements, identify input parameters and equations, create a workflow and schema, and then build a policy for the Guardian. We'll go into an introduction of AMS-I.D, which is a methodology for grid-connected renewable electricity generation. So typical projects that use AMS-I.D involve the construction and operation of a new power plant or unit, as well as retrofit, rehabilitation, replacement, or capacity addition for an existing power plant utilizing renewable energy sources and contributing the supply of electricity to the grid. The scope of this methodology includes various renewable energy generation units such as solar, hydro, tidal or wave, wind, geothermal, and renewable biomass. These units are designed to supply electricity either to a national or regional grid or to an identified consumer facility through the national or regional grid, and how we calculate the emission reduction. So here we see the final equation within the methodology, and it applies to all the calculation approaches. We also see that the emission reductions are calculated by subtracting the baseline emissions from the project emissions, and then we subtract the leakage emissions. This will give us the tons of CO2 reduced by the project activities, and will then reflect as a number of tokens that were minted. So this is just one equation from the methodology, and it's usually the final one that you'll see in the document. However, it is the most important one since it will represent how many credits we need to mint. Keep in mind that all the equations in the methodology need to be used if they're required. Those equations lead us to the values that represent the baseline emissions, project emissions, and the leakage, and then we can use this equation. So now we could go into more details of how we turn a methodology into a policy. So step one is going to be to pick a methodology. The starting point is determining which methodology you want to digitize. Maybe you're choosing a methodology for the DLT Climate Hackathon, or maybe you're a project developer that already knows which one you'll be needing. Once you have the methodology selected, then you can make sure that you have these three things before you start mapping out the policy. One is to create a workflow that outlines the steps and what occurs when someone is conducting a project. A keyword to search for is workflow. So if you're looking for Vera's workflow, you can just type up Vera workflow on Google and see what you get back. Reading through those documents, you'll be able to navigate through what steps they usually require a project proponent to go through. Two will be that you've read through the document and you have a general understanding of what is expected from the person who will have to fill out the project form with data. And three is that you have a place to organize the questions and equations that will be used within the policy. And we use Excel spreadsheets to do this. You can also see that there's a website here for CDM. And usually you'll find this for Vera, CDM, Gold Standard, or any other registry where they'll have a tab for methodologies or standards. And you can find that list there, pick which one you'd want to digitize, and that will be your starting point. Step two is to create your workflow. So here we have a workflow checklist. You want to have a few key things represented in your workflow, and those include what roles are to play a part in this policy, what steps are required from each role, are there any functionalities you need to include when the user is navigating through the policy, and what type of credit is your policy issuing. As you can see in this workflow, we have outlined the key schemas that will be included in the project design document, what should occur when a user fills out a monitoring report, and when the registry or VBBs need to conduct reviews or issue credit. And here I've included a workflow for Gold Standard to show that workflows across registries can look different, but essentially these workflows still provide important variables like roles and steps. Maybe you already have the name of the token noted somewhere else and you only want to map out the key steps, then that would be your workflow. You really want a map that you can follow or a guide that someone else can use if they're interested in learning more about your policy. And lastly, here's another Gold Standard workflow created by the previous hackathon winner, Gotham. He's added some extra details and even included steps illustrating where the credits go and where you can look at the VCs for this policy as the last step called View Trust Chain. This workflow has technical steps to help create the workflow blocks, but it can also be used by a user to help them understand what's expected of them. So as you can see, there's certain areas that say that project needs to be executed on the ground. That would be more for a project participant who is using this policy. Step three is the schema design. So once we have our workflow, we can start organizing all this information into groups that can easily translate to the Guardian schemas. Let's take a look at the AMS-I.D spreadsheet so we could have a visual representation of the groups that I'm talking about. So here we have the one that we designed for AMS-I.D. And we usually always start with a similar template to this, where we have the required field, selected disclosure, if we want to allow multiple answers, schema type, properties, parameter, question, answer, and I like to add a notes section. So when we start off, we have our project details, and this is going to be all the information that is usually required from a project participant from the registry when they're signing up. or listing this project. So here we have information that's more about who the organization is, where they located, where is this project located, the project start date, crediting period, monitoring period, also if they're following the laws in the area or country that they're conducting this project. And we also have a field for them to provide further information if they need that. Then we move into the baseline emissions, and here's where we start adding in the different calculations. So you'll see that each one of these that are green have an equation, or they'll have certain conditions in them. Then you can also see that here we have a question that asks them to select a case. So depending on the type of project that they have, this methodology outlines 6 different types of cases for the baseline. And once they select that, then we know which schema we should use. So for example, here, these gray sections are going to be what we consider a schema. And this would be for the greenfield power plants if they selected case 1. This would be case 2, case 3, and so on. And then we also have this blue section here that just says info, and the schema type is help text. So this is just going to be for the user to read through, and there's nothing required from them there. And then we just keep going all the way down. We'll see this is still the baseline. Now we're moving into the project emissions. And here we also have questions to determine which equations we should be using. All these things are outlined within the methodology document. We're just turning it into an Excel where we could separate it by schemas. We can also put in certain conditions and equations in an organized way. It's really mapping out what's in the PDF and turning it into this Excel. Then we have the final equation that I showed you guys in the presentation, where we have the emission reductions. It's going to be the baseline minus the project minus the leakage. And we have that here. And if you're familiar with any of the CDM policies, you know that they usually use tools to calculate certain activities that occur. So we have tool 3. Tool 7 has several sheets because there's different approaches that could be taken, as you see this flow chart here, depending on what the user answers of yes or no to these questions, then it'll redirect them to the correct schema. And then we have tool 10. And tool 10 is really more of a questionnaire to determine the remaining lifetime of an equipment. So they can answer each one of these, put yes or no, and provide an explanation or include documents. And now we'll go into the Excel schema import. So this feature can be used to simplify the process of creating schemas within the Guardian by organizing schemas through the template that you can have by clicking that icon at the top right that has the stars. You can seamlessly import them with the schema form automatically populated with all the relevant fields. I could also show you how we do that. So here we're on the Guardian and we're in the Policies tab. We can quickly create a policy, and we're just going to name this one Test Policy. We'll create that. All right, and now if we go to the Policies tab, we can see that we have that policy here. And then we can go to the schemas, because this is really to import schemas. So this was the button I mentioned. You can get this template here. I have one for this example. So we have where you could put the schema name at the top, the description. Here you would have a drop down that you could select the schema type. And then we have the required fields, the field type, parameter. I've seen that this is used for patterns as well as help text, where you can select, put the color that you want, as well as the size of the font. visibility if you want to hide any of these fields, what question are you asking, if you want to allow multiple answers, and the answer. So we're going to go ahead and import this. Make sure you click on Import from Excel. And then we have to select the policy we want it to go to. So we're going to put test policy and click Import. And we see that it imported. It says incomplete. So we have to go into this edit button. We could check everything that went in. So we see we have the schema name, the policy it's going to. We want it to be a verifiable credential, the description. And then when we start going down into the fields, you're going to see all the descriptions that I put in. So how many trees are located on the property? We want that as a number field type. We set it as required, and we want to allow multiple answers. So all of this is going to translate into different fields for your schema. You can see too that the one that had help text, that's where your color would come in and your font. And that's an easier way to import schemas. If you want to organize it that way, then you can just design it and import it. Now, step 4 is going to be the policy configurator. So using the policy configurator, you could add blocks to follow the workflow that you've outlined, the one that we previously went over. The properties, events, artifacts, and JSON can all be edited at the bottom right of the configurator. And so here you'll see that we usually separate it by the different roles. So you'll have certain containers for the registry, for the project participant, and for the VBBs. And then there's a lot of blocks that go within that for all the actions that need to be taken. Here you see the JavaScript, and this is going to be everything that we mapped out in the Excel, all the equations. It's also going to pull in certain fields from the schema that you've created to get those calculations for the project description and for the monitoring report. So the workflow blocks will probably be the most challenging part of this whole process, in my opinion, but I'm also less technical, so don't take my word for it. However, this is when the policy work comparison feature will be extremely helpful. As you've seen before, the workflows for these major registries stay the same. So if I was interested in doing a policy that follows the CDM methodology, then comparing existing open source CDM policies and seeing the side-by-side similarities or differences can help make more sense of what blocks tend to change and which ones stay the same. So you'll see that a lot of these are going to remain the same because these are two CDM policies. One of them is AMS-I.D and the other one is AMS-3H. We're going to have differences here in the tools that are being used. So that's what you're seeing in red. We have tool 7, tool 10 on one side, and we don't have it on the other side. Then you're going to see some in yellow. Maybe there's a different value in there or schema identifier that could be making it partially different. And that's how we turn a methodology into a policy using the Guardian. So now we could go into our demo of AMS-I.D. So we're going to go back to the Policies tab. Here I have AMS-I.D already imported. It's already in dry run. I'm going to stop it just because I think I have data in there already, and we can start it again. So we're going to set it to dry run. And then we could select register. We could also look at the policy configurator. And here we're going to see those blocks that you saw in the previous clips. So we have our registry, the project participant, and the VBB. You also have these choose roles at the top. We could go into the project participants one. We'll see if they can create a profile, wait for approvals. We have the header here. We could go into the projects tab and we'll see new project. Here we see the tools that are being used. So we have tool 3, 7, and 10. And then we're going to have that calculation block down here. And you're also going to see that for the report, because we also need to use these tools to calculate the monitoring report. So we're going to go ahead and click go. And now we're going to start by creating users. So I'm going to select this twice. I know that I need 3 roles in this policy, so I'll have the administrator, which could be our registry. Then I'm going to assign virtual user 1 to be the project participant. And we're going to give them a name. So in this case, I'm using a company name to be the project participant, and I could select create. And then we're going to go to virtual user 2 and assign that to the VBB. And then we'll just give the VBB name. Now we can go back to the administrator or the registry and approve those. So here we see the approve and reject button. You can also select view document and see what was submitted, which we have the company's name right here. And we're going to select approve. And then we have to go to the VBB tab. We could also do the same of approve and reject, and you can also click view document and see the name that was submitted. We're going to select approve. And now we can go to virtual user 1, which is the project participant, and select project. You're going to see this new project button. We can select that, and then we can start inputting all this data. So we see the project details here where we have the location. And then we're going to go ahead and put that here as coordinates. Is this project following all of the eligibility? Just say yes. Now we're going to put that same organization's name as the project participant's name that we put in. And John Doe. Their title is that they're the owner. The ownership is going to be the company that is conducting this project in this case. So now we usually have questions like this of emissions trading programs and other binding limits. If they're participating in those, we're going to put no. This is a good way to track if there's any double counting. We're using AMS-I.D, and we'll say the project start date is 12/14/2022. And we're following the AMS-I.D monitoring plan. All right, so now we're moving into the baseline. So now we could go ahead and answer that question that I showed you before of what case applies to this project. We're going to select case 1 and put this value in here. Now we have to fill out information for tool 7, which is going to be used to calculate certain parameters in AMS-I.D. Annual. And after answering that, we should be filling out the average OM for tool 7. You'll also see sometimes we have a button to click here and we can add entity. This is if we have fields that require multiple data points. So if I had different field types, I could go ahead and select here and add information for the other field type that I have. Now we could move into the build margin and we see we have some help text up there. And here I'll be using that since I have 2 power units. And we're moving into the combined margin for tool 7. We're going to answer a few questions. And then we'll be filling out project information. So this is all for the project scenario. We've moved out of the baseline scenario. We're going to select option 3. Let me know for this one. And since these aren't included in the project, we have to put zeros for them, except the global warming potential, since we know that. And then we could select create. So now we would have to go back to the administrator or the registry and select projects. We can view the document that we just submitted, and it's going to have the auto calculations as well. So everything that was green in the Excel should be here now. We're seeing the baseline emissions, calculations happening for tool 7. And then we'll see our emission reductions, our baseline again, project emissions, and leakage all being calculated. We could go ahead and select validate. And then we're going to go back to the project participant to submit a monitoring report. So you'll see here it says add report, and usually this would be once the project has been active for a while. It wouldn't be immediately that you submit a report. So we could go ahead and click that. And the user would have to fill this out with information that is reflecting everything that's happening during the monitoring period. So all this data will have to be input again, but you'll see that the project description will remain the same. So anything that has to do with the organization, descriptions about the activities, that's going to remain the same. And if you noticed when we were filling out the project description, there's a question that asks what monitoring plan are you following? And that's where you can give more information as to what parameters you're updating, when you're updating them, if it's following the methodology. Because usually at the bottom of each methodology document, it'll give you each parameter and tell you if they require you to update those and how often you should be updating them. so now we could submit the monitoring report. And we could go ahead and click next, go to the monitoring reports tab. And you'll see that it says assign with a drop down, and we're going to assign that to the VDB. So if you had multiple VDBs registered here, you'll see a list of them. We're going to select the one that we have. And now we could go to the VDB account. We're also going to select next to go to the monitoring report. We could click view document, and we're going to see that same one that we saw for the project description when we first submitted a form. It's going to have all the auto calculations, have your emission reductions, baseline, project emissions, and leakage. But this is with the monitoring report information. I just happen to use the same. And now we can go to the administrator. Click next. We're going to the monitoring reports where they have to approve this. They can view that same document we just looked at. And we're going to select approve. And we see that the status changed to minted. We get this notification here too that it started minting. And if we select next and go to the VPs, we can see the amount that we're minting, and we can select view trust chain. Now, when we go to the trust chain, you're going to see we have a token amount of -1. That's going to stay like that until we complete the minting process and get a notification that says it's been complete and the tokens have been transferred. So here we're going to see the verified signature, the policy's name, what version it's in, and if we go all the way down, we also see the trust chain. So here we have every VC file for all the steps we've taken. It tells us what user completed that step. We can also view the file with all the auto calculations that happen. This is really important for verification purposes. We want to make sure we see all the calculations. And then we could go all the way to the end. We see the monitoring report, the completion of that, to the minting of the CERs, where we see the amount and the token ID. I just saw a question come in if this is going to be recorded, and yes, this will be emailed to you to the same email that you put for the registration. All right. And we see that notification just came in. So we could take a quick look to see if it's reflecting. So now we see the token amount is reflecting here in the trust chain. All right, and that's the end of the demo. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit those in the Q&A. We also take questions through GitHub, so you could reach us there on Discord and directly through email. I believe we have GitHub discussions where we could go ahead and talk about any issues that you might be facing or difficulties running the Guardian. And if you are in the hackathon, we do have a free beta version of MGS that is currently available for you to use if you're having any difficulties getting open source running. All right, well, thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you here again next month. We'll have a plastics methodology for Vera. Thank you.